Thanks for joining me today for another Todd Talk, where we take teaching theory and turn it into teaching practice. What we're going to be talking today in the Todd Talk is the difference between doing a project and project-based learning, because there is this clear distinction between the two. And sometimes student or teachers are doing projects and they think it's project-based learning, but it's not necessarily that next step. And so it's clear, it's really important to understand the difference between those two. So I often get asked the question, what is the difference between doing a project and what is project-based learning? And there is a clear distinction between these two. And so I'm going to talk about that today. But one way to think about this is that projects are like the dessert. So with the dessert, you've had your main course, you've all the main things that you were going to get, and then the dessert is kind of an afterthought. And it's nice to have the dessert, and the dessert certainly adds to it, just like projects add to the enrichment of the students, but it is usually after the learning has taken place that you're taking a little bit further. Project-based learning is the learning. It is the main course. So students are learning the content standards, the learning objectives, and the skills that you have set out for students to learn for this particular unit. And you use your project-based learning in order for students to get that. So this list is not all-encompassing, but these are some of the major differences between projects and project-based learning. Now, sometimes there are exceptions to these. Sometimes some of these projects will be open-ended or whatever, but this or project-based learning will not necessarily be based on inquiry. But keep in mind that this is kind of a comprehensive overview of what most likely is going to be differences between these. So the first one is projects are usually based on directions. In other words, the teacher has said, you're going to do this, and students are going to go through step by step, like they were putting together a piece of furniture, reading the directions, and they're going to create a product from that based on these directions. And so typically, all of these projects look the same because everyone is working on the same thing. Project-based learning is based on inquiry. So in other words, students are given a lot of choice in what it is that they're learning and how they're going to demonstrate that learning and how they're going to be learning what they're learning. And so as a result, if you have 20 kids working on project-based learning, you might get 20 different products. It's going to be much different, and it's going to be a lot of student choice. And although they probably need to have some core understandings that are displayed in the project-based learning, a lot of the other stuff is going to be their decision to make. Projects tend to be teacher-directed. So the teacher is saying, this is the project you're going to work on. Project-based learning, like I've already talked about, is student-directed, where there's a lot of student choice. There's a lot of them making decisions, sometimes even deciding where they're going to take the learning or how far they're going to take the learning. And so it's more student directed, and the teacher is there to guide and as a resource, but the student is making most of the decisions. And I decided this is very important. I decided in my career because students are oftentimes much more intelligent, much more creative than I am. And so I didn't want to tell them this is what you have to do and limit them. I think that the student directedness opens it up, and it allows them to be creative and to make those decisions themselves. Projects typically can be done by yourself. You could go home and work on a project in your room, independent from anyone else. Project-based learning usually involves collaboration, not always, but usually, because that's part of the learning process, is how do you collaborate with people to make something better than if you had done it by yourself. And so that skill of collaboration is a very valuable skill to learn. And so in project-based learning, students are typically working with others to try to figure out. And it's not group work. I want you to, it is collaboration. So students are maybe doing different things to put it all together so that you have this final product. So it's not like everyone is doing the same thing. They're collaborating. So this person adds this person adds this person adds this, and you put those together, and it creates a product that is far greater than if that student had just done their one part. In projects, like I said already, the end product usually looks the same. So it's like you're manufacturing something. It's like an assembly line, and this is what. So if you go around, I'll see this from time to time where students will work on a project, and I'll go around and look at their projects hanging out in the hallway, and every single one is identical with very little variation. Project-based learning is more the end product might be different for every single kid, including when that is due. So students may pace themselves differently. They may take it further. They may add things that other ones are not adding if they have time. And so, like I said, if you have 20 different kids, you may have 20 different products, and that's perfectly okay, because as long as it's demonstrating mastery and the skills that you want it to do. Projects are typically close-ended. It might be answering a question. It might be answering a problem. But there's usually definitely a right or wrong response to a project. Project-based learning is more open-ended. There could be several possibilities, which is why you get all the different products, because different students might think differently and may come up to different conclusions. And so project-based learning typically is really open-ended. And that, again, is really good for gifted students, because the open-endedness allows them to explore a lot of things that maybe they wouldn't have explored before. And there's no ceiling to the project-based learning. Projects are usually done in the vacuum of a classroom or in the context of a classroom, and so students don't really see how it fits to the real world in the real world. Project-based learning, if done correctly, is based on real-world experiences. Either the problem that you have posed to them is a real-world problem, or they're coming up with for example, if I had a Shark Tank project-based learning where kids had to present to a panel of people, and they were making very real-world decisions that businesses have to make in order to do that. And so it was giving them some real-world experience within the classroom. So it showed them the context of what they were learning and how it was going to be used. In projects, a student is a student. So in other words, they are the ones they're following the directions, they're doing what they're been asked to do, and just like a student, they're following into line and checking off the boxes. In project-based learning, the student becomes the expert. So I find this often with project-based learning, students may take it further than even I will take it, or will take it to another level that I am not at. And so that's what you want, is you want your student to become an expert. And this helps with the enduring understanding, because in order to become an expert, you have to have that enduring understanding. And so I like the fact that project-based learning allows them to become experts. And oftentimes the product is them teaching others what they learned, because they're now the expert and now they can share that. So rather than me, the teacher, having to be the expert all the time, I've got 30 kids in the class that could be the expert and could lead a really meaningful lesson that students would react to. In projects, there's not as much opportunity for student choice. There might be some, but a lot of times, again, it is almost like a paint by numbers, where students are, I'm doing this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. The product looks the same at the end. And so students aren't given a whole lot of choice. With project-based learning, almost everything is student choice. It could be from your content to how you're going to learn it, to your product, to what skills you're going to bring to that. Those are all decided by the student. And this autonomy allows them for greater independence as learners, which is, again, another benefit of project-based learning, is it creates independent learners. So students don't need the teacher to direct them in order to learn. They've learned on their own. They have become the experts. They have, figured out how to kind of narrow down their inquiry into something that's plausible. And then they are making all these choices that support what it is that they're trying to do. In projects, the end result is typically just shared with the class. So like I said, I see these a lot of times outside the classrooms, hanging on the walls, but it's very within the classroom. Either students are presenting to just the class, or it is within the confines of their peers in their class. Project-based learning, if done correctly and done authentically, will have an authentic audience. So they may be presenting to someone who is an expert on it. So my Shark Tank example, they had to present to a panel of local business people who had their own businesses, and then kind of run this by them and get advice. I've had mentors that have helped kids with their writing, whether they're writing an autobiography or whatever. It may be that they are recording it and going to put it on YouTube for others to watch, or create a website that others will reference. So it becomes an authentic audience. And so other people are going to see this. The one thing I really like about this is whenever I have an authentic audience, kids are like, oh, I'm going to have to take this seriously because people are going to, outside of the class, are going to be seeing this. And I don't want to look like a fool. And so as a result, I will typically see students raise their bar when they know that there's an authentic audience, so that they can make sure that they are, impressing this person. Like it kind of encapsulates it, the project is the dessert. It typically takes place after the learning. So it is something to supplement the learning. If a kid finishes early, you might have an extension project, something like that. Project-based learning is the learning. So in my classroom, towards the end of my career in the classroom, I was doing project-based learning all the time. Everything was project-based learning. So every unit we did was centered around project-based learning. Students were working on a project and learning the content standards, the skills, whatever the learning objectives were. They were learning it through doing the project. And so that's why that was project-based learning. And so you can see there's a clear distinction between these two. There might be overlap from time to time, but you have to really ask yourself, are you doing projects in your classroom, or are you doing project-based learning? One real giveaway is when you're doing a project, if you're in front of the class directing the activities most of the time, if you are the kind of the sage from the stage, that is a project. If you are, as the teacher, your role has become more in the background, you are the guide from the side, you are not the one who's directing the learning, then that's project-based learning. That's how your litmus test for the difference between a project and project-based learning. So I hope that was helpful to distinguish between the two. Obviously, the project-based learning is where we want teachers to get. However, you can dip your toes in projects first before you get to the project-based learning, because project-based learning requires a totally revamping of how you run your classroom and how you teach. And so that can be sometimes overwhelming. So when I first started out trying to get into project-based learning, I did projects. So I would do a project here, a project there, and I became more and more comfortable with doing projects, to whereas I felt like I could do project-based learning effectively.